Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more coming your way. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I want to know how far this story has reached. No more waiting. Let's get into the video.
The transport shuttle landed with a soundless descent on the rusted platform of Hfy 7, a base so forgotten by the military bureaucracy that it didn't even ping on routine patrols anymore. Wind howled across the jagged hulls of abandoned dropships and crumbled defense towers, scattering ash and metallic dust into the violet-tinged atmosphere. The stars above blinked through the fractured dome like indifferent gods. Sergeant Aaron Valek stood alone on the platform, boots braced against the vibration of landing thrusters. His armor, old but polished, reflected the dim overhead lights like a war memorial in motion. He had expected decommissioning orders, maybe a planetary reassignment, something fitting for a decorated human combat engineer who'd survived the Thorali sieges of Perseid Rim. Instead, he received a box. No orders, no salute, just a massive containment unit the size of a cryopod, sealed with quantum locks and security glyphs reserved for classified tech. But this wasn't tech. Inside the pod was a being, still, contained, alive. Aaron stared at the label etched into the metal. C9 protocol asset status, alien, biocomposite, active caution. Sentient. He didn't open it right away. He waited until the shuttle was gone, until Hfy 7's quiet suffocated even his thoughts. Alone again, just the old outpost in the stars. The locks clicked, hiss. The pressure equalized. The pod exhaled. Inside was a female form, humanoid, tall, and coiled in a semi-suspended state. She was unlike any Thorali soldier he'd seen on the battlefield. No armor, no weapon limbs or neural spikes, just skin of a metallic violet, etched with pulsing patterns that shifted with her breath. Her eyes fluttered open, pure white, no pupils, and landed directly on him. He raised his sidearm, out of habit, not malice. She didn't flinch. She simply blinked and breathed. "Name?" he asked flatly, defaulting to protocol. She didn't answer. He lowered the weapon and tried again. "Do you understand me?" Still no response. But her gaze was clear. Not confused, not fearful, just waiting. He exhaled hard, long. "They said you were a weapon, no reaction. Just more silence." "Guess we've got that in common," he muttered. Hfy 7 had been partially decompressed for years, abandoned during the last cycle of the war. Aaron had volunteered to be stationed here alone. They said it was for high-level security clearance. He knew it was exile. His record was clean, but only because nobody had lived long enough to contradict it. He led her, still silent, through the darkened corridors, past dormant drones and ancient field generators. She walked without stumbling, her steps silent even on the metal grating. The lighting flickered as if her presence was interfering with the base's systems. The air smelled of oxidized wiring and decades of dry silence. Aaron directed her into a repurposed research chamber, the only room with a functioning bed and temperature control. She didn't resist, didn't ask questions, just sat on the edge of the bunk, hands in her lap, watching the dust float in the beams of light. The quiet was unbearable. He finally asked, "Why send you here? What are you?" Her voice was softer than he expected, not a prize. He turned to her slowly, startled. "You speak." "I listen," she said, a long pause. "Then you understand what this place is?" She nodded. "Why are you here? To be forgotten?" Her words cracked something in him. No scream, no tears, no resistance, just brutal acceptance. He'd seen soldiers beg to be released, aliens burn in their own plasma to avoid capture. But this quiet endurance, unnerved him more than any battlefield ever had. He didn't know what to do with her. So he left. Spent the next 12 hours reactivating power cores, recalibrating the atmosphere, and pretending that the soft breathing in the far corridor didn't sound like a heartbeat echoing in his bones. The base came alive again slowly, reluctantly, like an old man rising from his grave. Consoles blinked on. Water filters hummed. The internal climate stabilized into something less hostile. He cooked. Ate alone. She didn't eat. He caught her that night standing barefoot in the central atrium, hands pressed against the thick glass wall that once showed the stars before the shielding darkened with war soot. He'd never bothered to clean it. She turned and said, "This place is wounded." "So am I," he replied. She blinked, but didn't smile. "May I fix it?" she asked. He stared. "Fix what?" "The base." A laugh escaped him, bitter and broken. "Be my guest," and she did. By morning, the garden in hydroponics, long dead and frozen one, had begun to thaw. Roots had sprouted from cracks in the metal. New green, not of earth, not of Thirali. Something else, something alive. He watched her from the control room, arms crossed. She didn't look like a prisoner. She didn't act like one either. The pod had brought her here like a package. But now, walking among the growing green, bathed in filtered starlight, she looked more like a presence. A force. Like the war hadn't ended, only shifted into a different battlefield. The silence between them. Aaron Valak, war hero, recipient of 12 honors, exiled to a place without maps, had finally received his reward, and it breathed. The first week passed like a ripple through still water. Each day, the silence between Aaron and Elaine softened, bent at the edges. Neither of them made overtures. No questions, no names exchanged. But a rhythm began to emerge. He woke to find systems online he hadn't touched. Water recyclers flowed with mineral balance beyond standard calibrations. Drones, once obsolete, now glided through the halls on unfamiliar routines, maintaining the habitat like they'd been reprogrammed not by code, but by intuition. She never asked permission. He never said no. The garden came first. Once a ruined hydroponics base sealed behind radiation-blasted doors, now a living dome of alien flora. She coaxed it awake, not planted, not grown, but called forth. Translucent vines crawled up steel walls like they'd waited eons for her. Petals opened to the artificial light. Roots cracked through titanium plating and didn't stop. Aaron watched from the second-level catwalk, leaning against a rusted support beam, arms crossed as always. "You know that stuff's going to tear through the water lines." Ellen, standing barefoot in the soil she'd created, glanced up. "Yes." That's not an answer. Her violet gaze flicked to the pipe bursting with small white leaves. "I made a choice," she said simply. That word, choice, hung in the air like a spark in vacuum. Neither of them had been allowed much of it. Not during the war, not after. Outside the dome, the universe remained unchanging. The stars, the drifting debris fields, the broken satellites like forgotten prayers. Inside Alpha 7, something new took root. Aaron found himself spending more time in the dome. Not to help, just to be. She never spoke unless spoken to, but her presence filled the space like a low-frequency hum. He sat near the wall sometimes, rifle beside him, pretending to read mission logs that no longer mattered. And yet, even silence has a breaking point. One evening, as the filtered artificial twilight dimmed to simulate dusk, he said, "You fought at Persid Rim, didn't you?" She didn't answer at first. Her hands were buried in soil, adjusting the growth of a plant with crystalline thorns. "I did. I was there." She nodded once. Aaron stared at her, at the curve of her spine, the way her hair shimmered like oil under starlight. "I lost my brother there." She paused, her fingers still. "I lost my sister." A beat of shared air, breathing, no accusations, no anger. Just the weight of what was. Elaine sat back on her heels. "We do not name our dead in war. We let them return to the rhythm." Aaron looked away. "We name everything. It's the only way we know it existed." What was his name? "Leo," she repeated it. Leo. There was reverence in the way she said it. Like the name alone deserved to echo in the hallways. And then she did something unexpected. She laughed. It wasn't loud. Barely a vibration, but it carried across the dome like gravity shifting. "What's funny?" he asked, frowning. "You planted food last night. In the wrong cycle. It will rot by morning," he flushed. "I followed the instructions on the panel. You followed what humans believed the soil should be." She stood, brushing off her hands. "But this is not your soil. Then what is it?" She stepped close, yet not threatening, just near, and reached out, placing one hand over his chest, not touching but hovering. "This is soil made from memory." He didn't understand. Not fully, but something in his chest stirred, a tectonic plate shifting. Later that night, after she had gone to her quarters, a room she claimed without asking, because Alpha 7 had no hierarchy anymore, Aaron walked the hallways with a soldering torch and a bottle of stolen Terran whiskey. He rewired lights she'd already fixed. He cleared out an old storage unit and burned the contents without scanning them, and then, when the silence grew too loud, he spoke into the base's main terminal, recording a message that would never be sent. Command: this is Sergeant Valak. Asset remains contained and docile. No signs of aggression or subversion. Request continuation of solo oversight. Repeat, no extraction required. Base operating at above standard parameters. He stared at the blinking red light, then deleted the log. The next day, Elaine appeared in the mess hall, which hadn't functioned properly since year 3 of the war, and laid a single fruit on the table. It looked like a star collapsed into seed form. Eat, she said. I'm not a test subject. I already tested it. On myself. He hesitated, then took a bite. The flavor was sharp, electric, bitter, and sweet at once. He winced. Tastes like regret. Then it worked, she said. They didn't speak of war again that week. Instead, they rewired the AI core. She made it speak in Varley, her native language, a tonal tongue of musical clicks and breathing sighs. The base's synthetic voice, once cold and clipped, now sounded like an old coffee machine trying to sing. Aaron found himself smiling more, sleeping more, dreaming again. He dreamt of a world where prisoners weren't boxed like cargo, where war didn't define identity, where two beings from species bred to destroy could share air without drawing blood. The base no longer felt like exile. It felt like waiting. And something neither of them dared name, was growing. Not in the soil, but in the space between their silences. It began with a light. Just a flicker. Barely a pulse in the cold corridor outside the comms room. Aaron had ignored it the first time. Alpha 7 systems were old, always glitching. He and Ellen had rerouted most circuits through organic stabilizers she'd embedded in the base's framework. Root-like structures pulsing with bioelectric current. But even so, lights sometimes blinked. Doors stuttered. The station was still a grave, despite the garden growing inside it. But this time, the light came with a sound, a tone, long, rising, military grade. A signal he hadn't heard since the first orbital invasion of Vega's reach. He dropped his tools and ran. The time he burst into the comms chamber, the hologrid was already active. A rotating sphere pulsed in the center, crimson on black. Top priority clearance, from the Order of Planetary Reconciliation. Aaron's blood went cold. Elaine appeared at the doorway seconds later, breath calm despite the urgency in the air. Her gaze locked on the message hovering in the center of the room. Inbound inspection shuttle. Command ID, Nemeris 03. 36 hours ETA, full compliance required. Aaron didn't move. The name hit him like a pulse bomb to the chest. Sael Nemeris. She wasn't just order command. She was his former commanding officer. The woman who had pulled him from a pile of rubble during the siege of Arx Primus, who had sent him here with only 2 words. Take her. Ellen stepped forward, eyes never leaving the signal. They're coming for me. He didn't answer. They will take me, she said. Dissect me. Break apart what they don't understand. And say it was necessary. Aaron finally turned. His voice was low, steady. You don't know her. I know your species, she replied. No, he snapped. You know your war. That's different. The words struck both of them like gravity reversed. Silence returned. He watched her expression shift, flicker. She didn't speak. Just walked away. Aaron sat alone in the room as the hologrid continued to spin. He didn't sleep that night. When morning came, if one could call the artificial time cycle morning, he made a decision. A bad one. He overrode the message log, typed a reply. Subject escaped. No sign since cycle 41. Initiating search and recovery protocol. Recommend delay in inspection. He hit send, then stared at the blinking confirmation icon for a long, long time. When he found Ellen in the garden dome, she was planting something new. A thin violet thread of bioluminescence curling like smoke from her fingertips into the soil. She didn't look at him. I lied, he said. I know. You're not leaving. Now she looked up. Her eyes weren't glowing. They were tired. Why? He stepped forward, boots crunching on the crystalline surface. Because I don't want to go back to being the man they reward with prisoners. She tilted her head slightly, like she was weighing something impossible. "You still carry war." "I know," he whispered. "I can feel it in the walls." They stood in silence, the garden humming around them. Then Elaine spoke again. "Come with me." He frowned. "Where?" She led him. Not far. Out past the reinforced bulkhead near the lower docking ring, a section he'd sealed off long ago after a breach. But she had broken through. Plants trailed the floor here, roots that glowed faintly as they crept toward some unseen destination, and then they entered the crater. It wasn't natural, a blast radius. Charred walls. Carbon scoring still black on the hull, and in the center, what remained of a body. Bones fused to armor. Fragments of a thoroughly combat suit, nearly dust. A single armband still intact, its insignia faint but unmistakable. Elaine knelt. This was her. Aaron froze. "My sister," she said. "She died here during the assault. Your forces bombed this section thinking it was a weapons hold." Her hand moved gently over the remains, not in grief, but ritual. They were right. She was a weapon. Aaron dropped to one knee slowly, like gravity itself had turned to guilt. "I didn't know. You didn't need to." Ellen's voice was quiet. "We are not defined by what our empires did to each other. We are what we choose to carry forward." She reached into the soil beside her, the scarred, blackened soil, and pulled something out. A crystal shard, like the ones in the garden. "This is where it began," she said. "All this life. It came from her." Aaron took the shard in both hands. It pulsed faintly. "Warm. No graves," she whispered. "No markers. Just memory." They buried what remained of the Thorali warrior together. Not with ceremony, but with presence. No words, no weapons. Just hands in dirt. Ash in lungs. History bleeding quietly into the soil of a forgotten outpost. When they were done, Elaine stood first. "You could have left me. I still might," he said. "You're very annoying." A flicker of something, maybe a smile, passed across her face. That night, Aaron sat on the floor of the command center and listened to the old transmission logs from the war. Broken voices, shouts, screams, too many names. Too many orders. He selected them all and deleted them. The next day, Ellen reprogrammed the base's AI to disable external comms. When he asked why, she said, "Because if they can't hear us, they can't find us." For the first time, Aaron didn't feel like a soldier, and Elaine didn't look like a prisoner. They weren't enemies anymore. But they weren't yet something else, not yet, not until the next 48 hours tested everything. They had 48 hours. The inspection shuttle from the Order of Planetary Reconciliation had acknowledged Aaron's message with a cold, automated delay confirmation. But the lie had bought them nothing more than borrowed time. No escape, no pardon. Just a countdown until the sky would open and judgment would fall like a knife. Iran and Ellen sat across from each other in the main hub, the reactivated systems humming around them like a quiet heart. She no longer looked like a prisoner. He no longer looked like a soldier. And Alpha 7 no longer looked like a tomb, it looked like a choice. "We have 2 days," he said. "Maybe less." Ellen blinked slowly. Her skin shimmered with quiet bioluminescence in the low light of the operations chamber. "Then we give them something to find," he frowned. "What do you mean?" She stood. "We build a home. Not for them. For us." It sounded absurd, suicidal, but he understood her immediately. They wouldn't run. They wouldn't beg. They wouldn't explain themselves to those who didn't want to understand. Instead, they would make something that could only exist because they had chosen each other. And so they began. The base became a canvas. They rewired everything, scrapped the defense systems, disabled the beacon, ripped out the military-grade sensors and replaced them with Elaine's living roots, tendrils of organic circuitry that pulsed with a faint rhythm, like nerves listening for danger. The AI, now completely reprogrammed in Varley, no longer followed the standard command tree. It sang instructions, and the systems responded like symphony sections aligning themselves to a conductor they couldn't see. System integrity. Alive, it would say in its distorted, whimsical accent. A byproduct of being trained using fragments of coffee machine subroutines Aaron had salvaged from the mess hall. The base's climate regulators stopped simulating Earth. Instead, Ellen adjusted them to Thorali thresholds, higher humidity, Cooler shadows, dusk-lengthened light cycles. The result was surreal, a world that belonged to neither of them and yet belonged only to them. They called it middle light. There was no ceremony to the name. It just came up during one of their long hours on the observation deck, staring through the cleaned, repressurized dome at a sky studded with endless stars. "I don't know what this place is anymore," Aaron said. Elaine had looked at the garden, then the machinery, then at him. "It's between light and dark, between silence and war, between you and me." "Middle light," he whispered. She had nodded. They weren't lovers. Not yet. But there was a gravity between them now, stronger than any mass could create. Every glance carried volumes. Every brush of skin during repairs left a static charge that lingered longer than physics allowed. They didn't speak of love. They spoke of systems, of roots, of heat recycling and spore cultivation, but everything in the station began to whisper of union. Even the transmitter, the last remnant of war, they buried together in the garden. "You sure?" Aaron asked, holding the battered piece of tech that had once transmitted orbital kill codes. "Yes," Elaine replied. "It doesn't speak for us anymore. They placed it into the earth like a body, covered it with crystal shards, marked the site with nothing." That night, Aaron walked into the garden alone. Elaine was already there, tending to a new bloom of spiraling pollen vines. He watched her from the shadows for a long time, chest tight. "You could still leave," he said finally. She didn't turn. "So could you." Silence stretched. "I wouldn't stop you," he added. "I wouldn't ask you to." Another beat. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "I'm not," she said. "I've already died once. Now I am only what I build." He took a slow step forward, then another. Finally, he stood beside her, watching the glowing leaves rise and fall with the station's recycled breeze. "I never wanted a home," he said. "Neither did I. But now that it's here," she reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. When morning came, if you could call the soft gradient of violet sky through reinforced glass morning, they woke to an alert. Not hostile. Not loud, just a soft pulse in the air. The inspection shuttle had entered the system. A message blinked quietly on the wall. "Inspection imminent. Commence transfert protocole. Subject retrieval priority alpha." They didn't run, they finished their tea in the garden. The AI sang a Thorali lullaby in a loop. It had learned it from Elaine's breathing pattern. Aaron suited up. Not in armor. In a uniform he hadn't worn in months, patched, scuffed, with no insignia. Elaine wore nothing but her patterned robes, the ones she'd woven from converted pressure suit